Good morning and a warm welcome to the webinar from Digitay Swift Kanban and Lean Kanban University. The topic is Kanban, when and how. Just waiting for a number of people like we can see joining the webinar. But we'll go ahead and get started with some of the introductory agenda and get on with the webinar. Okay, so we'll get going with introductions, and then for those of you who may not know much about us, I'll also talk a little bit about Digitay Swift Kanban, just a couple of minutes, and then hand over the session to our guest speaker, our main speaker today, David Anderson, on the topic Kanban, when and how. And at the end of it, hopefully we will have a good session on Q&A based on questions that you have at your end. The webinar is being recorded. We will share the webinar recording and the slides from the webinar after it in a follow-up email. You feel free to ask questions anytime using the Q&A box that you should see on the right side of your screens. We will take those questions at the end of the webinar. So with that, just a quick introduction. I would assume again that most of you already know David, and David really doesn't need any introduction. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm Senior Vice President and Head of Marketing for Digitay, which publishes Swift Kanban. But for those of you who don't know David, who might not know David, just a quick slide here on who David is. We've been in association with David since 2010, and David has been active in the Lean Agile community for a much longer time. He's of course the originator of the Kanban Method and later the enterprise services planning, which has helped countless organizations in terms of service delivery strategy, fitness for purpose, and a variety of operational improvements. Anything that helps modern businesses run the business well and to deliver their services well to their customers. He's of course a well-known management trainer and consultant, and of course speaks in a variety of conferences worldwide. And he's authored many books, including the Blue Book for Kanban, the Kanban Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business, and besides others. Like I said, he really doesn't need any introduction, but again, for those of you who might not know him well enough, you'll enjoy listening to him today. I'm excited today about the topic in particular because I think Kanban has been growing steadily over the last maybe 10 years or more, and we've been associated with for the last 7-8 years. And I think more than ever we are seeing people start to look at Kanban as the next wave of running their agile initiatives, and also looking at it as the sort of primary tool for improving what they're doing, whether it is Scrum, whether it is iterative or waterfall, or even any other type of business that they might be running, whether it's marketing or HR or other type of stuff. So I think today's session by David is going to be, and I think he kind of alluded to it in some email threads, that it is going to be, I think, a great recap for those of us who've been on the journey for some time, but also a fantastic topic for those of you who might be new and just getting started on your Kanban journey. So I'm really looking forward to this session. Before I hand over to David, let me just quickly tell you about Digitay. We've been a pioneer in web-based tools for distributed teams to run a variety of software as well as other types of projects. We're headquartered here in Cupertino, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Have nearly about 1 million users using our products around the world. And we have essentially tools for enterprise agility at different levels. And of course, Swift Kanban is our flagship Lean Kanban product. Roughly about 60 to 70%, or maybe more, 70 to 80% of our customers tend to be IT or software customers, and they use us for a variety of different purposes in terms of running their software and IT initiatives and DevOps. We also have a lot of usage in terms of portfolio Kanban and portfolio management to provide a lot of capabilities around that, especially with our enterprise services planning module, Swift ESP, which sits on top of Swift Kanban. And so you see a variety of different capabilities that we provide for visualizing your different types of portfolios and doing things like risk profiling, risk assessment of your projects, and then running the right kind of initiatives at the right time in your organization. We also have several customers who use us for non-IT, non-software purposes, marketing, HR, are probably the biggest areas where they get used, but also areas such as procurement and legal, etc. And of course, we have hundreds of people using us for personal Kanban, a variety of different applications there. We are well known for our sort of support for all of the sort of basic and even some of the advanced Kanban analytics that you might expect to see from a Kanban tool. And just a quick look at some of the key customers that we have, and you'll recognize hopefully a number of well-known brands that use Swift Kanban and other digital products in this space. So with that, I'm going to hand over to David. David, it's an honor. Like I said, really looking forward to your session today. Let me go ahead and make you presenter.
Thank you, Mahesh. Can you see my screen? Is it working correctly?
Yeah. Yes, I can see.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. When Mahesh reached out to me recently and said we'd like Kanban when and how talk, I thought, I've done that before. While researching for this talk, I realized that it's about 7 years since I last presented this topic at a series of conferences or in a webinar, so perhaps it's more than time that we should revisit understanding the appropriateness and when and how to go about implementing the Kanban method. So, first of all, reasons we might choose Kanban. There are 3 key business reasons, appropriate purposes. The first one, sustainability, relief from overburdening. This could be at the individual level. Someone feels that they're overloaded, too much work in progress, too much multitasking. It could be at a team level, small team, 2 people, as many as 12 people perhaps, but more than an individual. But it's the same problem. They have too many things going on, too much multitasking. Or it could be at a service level or a whole product unit with multiple services, or a business unit at a scale of perhaps a couple of thousand people at the upper limit for a single implementation. So Kanban relieves you from overburdening, and we'll talk about how we do that in a few minutes. Then service orientation, improved customer satisfaction. That's the next reason or the next purpose for which you might choose Kanban, because Kanban systems give you faster delivery, more predictable delivery, and as a consequence of relieving people from overburdening, the quality tends to be significantly higher. So faster, more predictably with better quality, and if your customers would value that, then adopting Kanban is an appropriate choice. And thirdly, there's survivability, developing the enterprise DNA to be able to adapt, to be able to cope with what's referred to as VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if your business suffers in a market or a political environment where you have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, then being able to evolve, to change, to adapt quickly to unfolding events and new circumstances, that's important for the survivability of your business, and Kanban can help with that too. So for any one or perhaps all 3 of these reasons, you would adopt the use of the Kanban method. What about the scale of appropriateness? Well, we recognize 4 main levels of scale. There's personal Kanban, and Mahesh mentioned that people are using Swift Kanban for that purpose. The personal relief of overburdening, visualizing their own work, thinking about what should they work on now, what can wait until later, reflecting on what they've completed recently. The same at the team level, perhaps 2 to 12 people scale. Then the service delivery or workflow level, a series of teams that collaborate together to deliver on a customer request. So we might have 6 to 60 people. I think the largest single Kanban board I saw was coordinating around 125 people at a single company that I visited in Israel, I think 8 years ago now. Time goes by. While typically we see the upper limit in the 50 to 75 person range. So service delivery workflow, a series of teams collaborating together. And then interdependent network of services, an entire product unit or a business unit might be 10, 15, 20 separate Kanban implementations where they send work between one Kanban system or board to another one, and we have a network of interdependent services, and that will happily scale to 450 people, 600 people, and we've seen implementations with a telecom equipment vendor that we know well of up to 2,000 people essentially in a single implementation. And that particular company had multiple of those, so they had tens of thousands of people implementing Kanban. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is new, relatively new, certainly new in comparison to 7 or 8 years ago, is the Kanban maturity model. And it's our general solution for scale and appropriateness. The reason the Kanban maturity model exists is to help you understand how to implement Kanban based on your purpose, your scale, and your level of organizational maturity. So we have our 7-level organizational maturity model, and that looks at both the scale of the organization and how well the organization manages risk, reacts to stressful circumstances. And typically where we're trying to get an organization is somewhere between level 3 and 4 on this slide, that they can deliver fairly consistently what the customer's expecting, and they can manage their business risks with some certainty, and that produces a resilient and robust business, one that's capable of satisfying customers and surviving for a reasonably long time. Where we find most of the market is at level 0 and 1 in this chart, particularly level 1, where they're inherently fragile. The implementations are only at the team level. They often don't have a good idea of who the customer is, what they've asked for, why they've asked for it, what risks they're managing. Customers aren't satisfied, and the organization struggles to organize itself at anything greater than the team level. And I'm sure that Mahesh, along with other tool vendors that Swift might compete against, will validate that most of their adoption is at the personal or team level and not at larger scales like we see here, the project or service or multiple projects, shared services, portfolio level, up to the entire business unit. This next slide is just illustrating that the maturity model maps a large number of practices, and the idea is that if you can understand the purpose for which you're pursuing Kanban, the scale you're pursuing it at, the maturity of your organization, then you can pick appropriate Kanban practices and implement something which is just right for you. It's the fit for purpose, correct Kanban implementation for your current level. And all of this is described in a relatively recent book published back in April, the Kanban Maturity Model, which I co-authored with Teodora Bozeva. There's pop openings, and the poster and the book map 132 Kanban practices against organizational maturity, scale, and purpose. Let's look back now at some basic Kanban ideas that now, these are 10 years old now. The general practices of Kanban, many people on this webinar today will be familiar with these. The 6 general practices of the Kanban method: visualize, limit WIP, manage flow, make policies explicit, implement feedback loops, improve collaboratively, and evolve experimentally. So how do we use these in order to deliver on our reasons for adopting Kanban, the sustainability, service orientation, or survivability purposes, agendas that we might have? Well, first of all, visualization, visual boards, and Mahesh showed us quite a few during his introduction. These engage people emotionally. They make invisible work visible, they make the workflow visible, they make the collaboration required to complete the work visible, and they help the people doing the work understand who the customer is, what they've asked for, and perhaps what risks they might be managing, both internally as business risks and the risks the customer might be managing, and that helps us with things like understanding the urgency of the customer's request, or their tolerance to late delivery or delays, or their tolerance to poorer quality, and those types of things. Limiting WIP. Limiting WIP primarily helps us avoid overburdening. It works at the individual level, at the team level, at the workflow or service delivery level, and at the entire enterprise scale, at a product unit, at a business unit level, at a portfolio level. Limiting WIP is an incredibly useful tool to relieve overburdening. The challenge, of course, is that when you limit WIP, you have to decide what should we work on now, what should wait until later, and if later, when, and what should we not do at all. And that's known as triage discipline. And developing good triage discipline is something we recognize as a significant barrier to achieving level 3 maturity on the Kanban maturity model. And it's something that a Kanban coaching professional would be able to help you with, to coach an organization, and also just generally educating triage discipline. Mahesh briefly showed the Swift Kanban capability for modeling risk and creating risk assessment framework and risk profiles. And these are a very powerful tool for helping make decisions about what to work on now, what to leave until later, and if so, when. So together, visualization and limit WIP provide a solution for sustainability. And sustainability is very much the purpose. The relief from overburdening is the goal we see at low maturity levels, so levels 1 and 2 on the Kanban maturity model. And therefore, implementations at that level tend to focus on visualization and limiting WIP, often at the personal level, and don't get much deeper into the other 4 general practices of Kanban. Moving to the third one, manage flow. We manage flow because we want to deal with unevenness in the flow. And unevenness is caused by dependencies, uncertainty and ambiguity about the work that we have to do, perhaps capacity-constrained resources or services who have to contribute or collaborate, the size of the work, the complexity of it, the risks associated with it, overburdening of individuals or teams or entire services, and the mix of urgency and the required classes of service and or queuing discipline. Sometimes we generally refer to those things as the priority of the work. When you have a heterogeneous set of of risks and a broad mix of urgency. This tends to affect the flow. Some things might flow very quickly while others get delayed because you gave priority to another item. So managing flow requires us to focus on blocking issues and implement improvements to reduce the likelihood and the impact of blockers. And the Kanban maturity model maps those practices. It shows when it's appropriate to start focusing on managing flow and describes the practices, tells you how to do it. The fourth general practice is make policies explicit. Much of the unevenness comes from policies and organizations. Unevenness might be caused, for example, by the requirement for an approval. And while you wait for an approval, things are not flowing. And the reason that you need an approval is a policy. It's a policy that's perhaps been implemented to mitigate or manage some risks. And making policies explicit enables us to hold conversations about the appropriateness of our policy, the appropriateness of the risk that we're trying to manage, and whether the policy we've enacted is the right way to go about that, and to look at the balance. Is the benefit we're receiving in terms of risk management worth the impact that we are seeing in delay of other items? So making policies explicit makes us aware of their general impact on our system, our service delivery, our performance, and makes them discussable. It also takes away a lot of the them and us finger pointing, because now we have this third object to point at, the policy, and question whether it's appropriate or not. So together, managing flow and making policies explicit enable better service delivery and better customer satisfaction. So building on our existing visualization and limiting WIP has a significant part to play towards managing flow. We layer on the managed flow practices and making policies explicit practices, and now we have a world where our people, our services, our portfolio is relieved from overburdening, quality is better, we have better flow, we have more predictable service delivery, and consequently we have happier customers. And we see the service orientation as a focus at levels 3 and 4 in the Kanban maturity model, and the adoption of these practices and the elaboration of the Kanban boards to facilitate the managing of flow, and the use of metrics to facilitate managing blockers. These emerge at levels 3 and 4. General practice number 5 is implement feedback loops, and the Kanban method provides 7 of those. The Kanban meeting, the concept of gathering the workers in front of the board, perhaps on a daily basis. Most people are familiar with that. Replenishment meeting. We've pulled some things across our Kanban board. What should we start next? Delivery planning meeting. We have stuff that's almost finished. Is the customer ready to take delivery of it? And how do we coordinate that? And then service delivery review. Are we meeting customer expectations? How long does it take us to make deliveries? How predictable are we? When there are appropriate risks and timely deliveries appropriate, do we meet that timely delivery? How good is our quality? If customers are unhappy, what should we do about it? And all of this at a single workflow level, the collection of teams collaborating together. Then we have risk review, often seen in larger implementations where we want to analyze risks associated with blocking issues perhaps, or dependencies, or the need for a collection of classes of service because there's a heterogeneous mixture of urgency and other customer risks that we're managing. And then operations review, the concept of the service delivery review, but at the scale of a system, a network of Kanban systems. So at the scale of a product unit or an entire business unit. And then strategy review, which services are we providing? Are they the right services? Which market segments are we serving? How well are we serving them? Are they the right market segments? Should we be amplifying them? Should we be dampening them? Is our capability aligned with our strategy? And if not, how do we bring those back into balance? Then the final of the 6 general practices is improve collaboratively and involve experimentally. And fundamentally, our belief is that no one is smart enough to outguess the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that exists in the marketplace, that exists in the external world, that designed and managed solutions are fragile, that defined processes, prescribed practices, these are inherently fragile, that they're often designed for a context which doesn't really exist in the real world. And if it did, it would only be there fleetingly. Moments later, the context will have changed. That a capability to adapt is robust, that being able to react to the circumstances you see and adapt your internal processes and service delivery workflows is the robust solution that delivers long-term survival. A culture of experimentation and shop floor empowerment, something that Toyota calls Kaizen culture. This is necessary if you're going to have that capability to adapt. And you need a culture of trust and failure tolerance. If people are afraid, they will not experiment, and we will lose our ability to adapt. Leadership should be encouraged at all levels, and improvements can be driven from any level, regardless of the level of the employee or their length of experience in your business or with your company, with your industry. They might be the one who has the good idea, because no one individual is smart enough to figure it all out. And we need to encourage anyone, regardless of their position, to be able to speak up and take action. And we've codified a lot of these ideas into something called the Evolutionary Change Model, which is one of the coaching practices in the Kanban Maturity Model. This will actually appear in the 2nd edition of the book due in 2019. And if you're interested in more detail about this, you should check out the video from the Lean Kanban India keynote speech that I gave. In general, more information about the Kanban Maturity Model from kanbanmaturitymodel.com. So together, the feedback mechanisms, the Kanban cadences that we saw, the 7 of them, and the development of a culture that encourages collaboration, experimentation, these are what deliver on survivability. So how do you go about implementing Kanban? And there are many ways to do it. And what we're interested in is something that's appropriate for you. Well, nowadays we would like you to be using the Kanban Maturity Model. We have spent 10 years looking at implementations, capturing case studies, examining what was successful and what wasn't successful. And we've mapped 132 practices against organizational maturity, scale, and purpose. And therefore, we can help you avoid some of the mistakes that other people may have made in the past. We have hopefully codified a lot of the learning and experience of those who've come before you. The Kanban maturity model exists to drive appropriate application of Kanban practices. We recognize that there's two failure modes in Kanban adoption. The first is overreaching. It's failure to install. It's often because you hired some consultant who thinks they're the smartest guy in the room. They have the answer to everything. They've read more books than anyone else. And they design a very ambitious implementation and transition plan, and it's too much too soon. Your organization isn't ready for it. That you get a lot of resistance to change from individuals and institutionally. And the consequence is that the implementation is aborted. And there's a regression back to existing practices, and people say things like, everything was better around here before we had the board with the sticky notes and we were doing this Kanban thing. That didn't work for us. The second failure mode is the false summit plateau. This manifests itself as people saying, we've done Kanban, it was good, it really helped us, what next? And of course, anyone who's really a Kanban practitioner will tell you that you're never done and there's always more that you can be doing. And what happens here is usually it's a shop floor initiative. It's a very small scale. It's focused on relief from overburdening, relief from a stressful, abusive environment. It improves transparency and collaboration, and therefore simple visualization, maybe some simple limiting of WIP. Kanban gave us what we needed, and the Kanban maturity model exists to illustrate that there's a lot more that you could be doing to avoid this false summit plateau problem. So the Kanban maturity model prevents both of these failure modes. And therefore, if you're looking at adopting Kanban now, perhaps you don't want to read the whole book, but we've made available some handy posters and some accessible material to guide you. We highly recommend that you use the Kanban maturity model to identify the appropriate level of implementation for you. More than 130 practices mapped from studying implementations over a 10-year period of time. We have some other tools that help with implementation. The system thinking approach to introducing Kanban, or static. And if you've taken our Kanban system design class, you're already familiar with this. It's an 8-step process for getting started. Understanding what makes a service fit for purpose, what represents customer satisfaction, understanding sources of dissatisfaction, what's wrong with the current delivery, both from an external perspective and an internal perspective, analyzing your sources of demand and the nature of the demand, who asks you for what and when, and what's the pattern of those requests, analyzing your current capability, how long, how predictable, how accurate, how good is the quality, modeling that service delivery workflow. What activities do you perform, and what do they tell you? What do you learn from those activities, and how do you decide to move from one activity to the next? Identify and define classes of service based on urgency and other risks that your customers might have. In other words, how do you prioritize work to satisfy your customers better? And then you design the Kanban system based on all the information you've gathered in the first 6 steps in the process. And then finally, the 8th step is socializing the design and negotiating the implementation and rollout. Now, step 8 is pretty advanced, and we teach that in our coaching classes. Step 1 is developed in some detail now with our Fit for Purpose book and the Fit for Purpose training class. But steps 2 through 7 are standard in our basic KMP1 Kanban system design two-day training class. So to summarize, and then we can take some questions with the remaining time, Kanban helps with 3 core business challenges, sustainability, relief from overburdening for individuals, for teams, for service delivery workflows, or an entire business unit. It helps with service orientation and customer satisfaction, faster, better, more predictable delivery, and it helps with survivability of your business, wiring you to have the culture and the mechanisms to adapt in the face of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if your business is suffering from one or two or all three of these challenges, the Kanban method can help you. It's an appropriate choice. In order to implement it successfully, use the Kanban maturity model to guide you. We've captured the knowledge and experience of many people over a decade and codified it in a very consumable fashion with the intent of making a very large number of people much more successful with their Kanban implementations. And we have some new stuff coming. The evolutionary change model codifies some of our coaching guidance in a way that will be much more accessible. And look at, find the video from Lean Kanban India, but look out for the publication of that with the second edition of the book in the spring of 2019. More information from kanbanmaturitymodel.com. And with that, I'll take questions and I'll pass it back to Mahesh to facilitate the questions.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Great talk. I think a very succinct capturing of all the experience and the learnings of the last, I would say more than 10 years. So great presentation. We'll invite all of the people on the webinar who are here to ask you questions through the Q&A box that you see on the right-hand side. David, let me start with a couple of questions that I think we hear from customers around the world, and in general, sort of curiosity about how Kanban is being implemented or being adopted. So firstly, in your experience, who are the main communities that are implementing Kanban? Is it the Agile Scrum teams? Is it portfolio managers, project managers who are looking to visualize and manage risk? Is it IT ops? What is your experience in the people that you see?
Of course, a vendor like you also has your own insight on that you know who's subscribing to use your tool, and
right.
The different vendors have different experience. I can answer it from my experience, who's coming to our classes around the world, and what I'm hearing reported back from our network of over 200 Kanban trainers globally. And then of course there's also who we see attending our conferences around the world. And we've reached a point where I feel that in most markets it's about 50% IT or technology related and 50% who would identify as being something else. And that something else is quite broad. It could be human resources or marketing or legal, civil engineering, architects, advertising agencies, market research companies, web design agencies. Really quite a broad range of non-IT related. And then within IT, there's software and product development, might be application development in an IT department, or it could be a product or some kind of pure play web company. Historically, Yahoo was always one of our early and quite broad adopters. So a broad range in IT, and of them, maybe half are in the IT operations, DevOps, systems maintenance world, and the other half are in product development, and maybe half or more than half of them are using some sort of agile method and typically Scrum. And I'd say that currently, traditionally it was half, and now it's half of half. So it's about 25% of people who come to us have been using Scrum for some period of time, and it helped them to some extent, but it's reached a limit to its effectiveness, and in some cases is actually causing them some pain, and consequently they're looking for an alternative. In general, we've used this tagline for a long time now, and we've felt since the very beginning with Kanban that it's the alternative path to agility. Rather than adopting a defined, prescribed method for achieving agile. Kanban's about wiring your organization to evolve your own unique solution to become adaptable. And we believe that's very robust. So there's quite a broad range, and motivations. Outside of IT, the motivation tends to be we want better service delivery, we want happier customers. Inside the IT world, very low maturity organizations, the motivation still, unfortunately, tends to be relief from overburdening. That we adopted Scrum because we thought it would relieve our overburdening, and it's worked to some extent, but it's not working completely, and we need something else.
Yep, perfect. So as you alluded, we certainly see some of the same profiles signing up for Swift Kanban, and clearly IT ops probably has the leading share of our usage, followed by application and software development teams. One other, and of course then project and portfolio managers who are using it for portfolio visualization and setting up hierarchies of Kanban boards. One or two other communities that have, I think, become more active in the last probably couple of years is, one is product managers. So I think there are a number of product managers who have started to use Kanban as an upstream management of backlog, pruning of backlog, and prioritization of the right set of things to be worked on at the right time. And also visualizing the process of how you involve stakeholders in coming to the priority of work that needs to be done, and also then breaking down higher level work into lower level user stories, or whatever way you want to they define it, so that the dev teams have or the IT teams have the right size of tasks that they can work on at the right time available to them. So that's, I think, one additional set of people that we see quite a lot. And then secondly, I think amongst the non-tech, non-software, I think probably marketing is the one function that we see the most. Agile marketing has been around for quite some time, and traditionally they have used Scrum as the method for managing agile marketing. And I think a number of these people are now also looking at Kanban as probably the more natural fit to the way marketing works, and using that instead of Scrum. So let's take a couple of some of user questions. I'm sort of people who are attending the webinar today. So the first one is, firstly, thank you for the time and the great advice. Could you please advise if KMM aims to replace static when adopting Kanban in new teams who have no chance to work with Kanban yet?
No, they're not. The one is not a replacement for the other. In fact, static will be included as one of the coaching practices when we launch the second edition of the book, KMM 1.0, and the coaching practices extension. Static will be included. So we consider static part of the KMM. It's not a replacement.
Okay. You again talked about people who are adopting Kanban. In our experience also, a lot of our customers tend to be level 0 or level 1, and for the longest time they stay there as they are adopting and universalizing Kanban within the organization. Do you have any advice on how do they sort of cross the chasm from level 1 to level 2 or level 3 perhaps? I don't, wherever you see that. Do you see that tendency of people to remain at what we used to call proto-Kanban implementations and then moving to real Kanban?
We're developing specific guidance, again based on observation from case studies, on barriers to level 2, barriers to level 3, barriers to level 4. And some people will have seen me present rudimentary versions of that guidance in the past. My 2016 keynote speech from Lean Kanban Central Europe, for example, looked at getting to pool at enterprise scale, essentially codifying barriers to levels 3 and 4. So we'll be publishing the guidance on those barriers in the first half of next year and including them in the KMM 1.0 release and in the KMM training class. So we have some understanding of some of the practice challenges which are difficult to adopt. But there's another much more fundamental problem, which is leadership and taking responsibility, really achieving level 3 maturity and the need for a full Kanban system implementation, similar to, for example, the original one we did with Microsoft in 2005 that we teach in our Kanban system design class, or other early implementations like the Corbis implementation from 2007, or people who copied that, Robert Bosch, IPC Media, and so on, very early adopters. There was a common thread there that in each case there was a manager, usually a middle manager, who was being held responsible and accountable for good customer service and satisfactory fit-for-purpose delivery. And that individual, in the Microsoft example, it was Dragos Dimitriou. With Corbis, it was me. With Robert Bosch, it was Eric Landis. And in each case, the individual was taking responsibility and showing the leadership necessary in order to put in place the changes to provide satisfactory service delivery. So where there's a lack of leadership, there's a lack of drive. Why do we need anything more than a team level? Well, that's because no one's taking responsibility or being held accountable for satisfactory customer delivery. So we see leadership as a significant impediment, and we're developing the leadership practices extension, and we're now offering a 2-day class on leadership practices. I'm also looking at developing additional curriculum in the area of leadership development, and we're now coaching senior executives at clients. I've been working with a large South American bank recently, where I have access to some high-ranking executives, and one of them asked me last week when I was there, he said, so you're telling me that we need to develop leaders, that we need to help them develop an understanding of ethics and morals and responsibilities and how they should be behaving? And my answer was yes. That ultimately, if you want your business to perform better, you can't expect people to walk in the door with all these skills and all these behavioral attributes that you need. You need to find the raw material and the raw talent and develop it. So you'll see a focus in our future work and the products we're bringing to market, classes, training, consulting materials, the leadership practices extension for the KMM, a significant focus on developing leadership. And those interested that could look at my Lean Kanban India closing keynote on leadership maturity levels.
Okay, I think maybe we should share a link of that talk with people when we follow up on the email, since you referred to them a couple of times in the webinar. A related question which you might have answered perhaps already, but I know that you blogged about this in the past as well, that are there some characteristics in a project or a team or a culture where you know that Kanban might not work?
So I think fundamentally we're talking about evolutionary change. And the much earlier 2011 version of the talk I've just given it made this comparison of Carly Fiorino when she was in charge of Hewlett-Packard versus Lou Gerstner when he was in charge of IBM. And Gerstner's approach was a very evolutionary approach. He famously said the last thing IBM needs now is a new strategy, that we're just going to focus on being good at what we do and effectively evolving. Now that evolution over 10 years involved massive changes, maybe 185,000 new people, and 185,000 had to leave and to precede that and move into significant new businesses, some major acquisitions, divestiture of other businesses and so on. But a very evolutionary thinker, a guy who focused very much on the culture, where someone like Carly Fiorino, she wanted the big grand gesture, the annex compact and declare victory. So her approach was to make grand gestures and take big risky bets and revolutionary change. And fundamentally, you don't sell the Kanban method to a revolutionary. It's not dramatic enough for them. They will perceive that it takes too long. And even if it didn't, it doesn't give them the ego boost of being the great hero who delivered the victory. As Chet Richards said in a keynote at Lean Kanban Central Europe a few years ago, we did it all by ourselves. A successful Kanban implementation should leave the workforce with the feeling that they did it all by themselves, and your revolutionary, egotistical leader will not appreciate that. So you won't be able to create the culture for Kanban to be successful. As for purely mechanical reasons, if you're not overburdened, Kanban's not going to help you. If you've got beautiful, smooth flow and very good customer service and satisfied customers, then Kanban doesn't have that much to offer you. Or if you're already very good at adapting and you have mechanisms in place for evolutionary change already, then Kanban again has limited value to offer. So if you're good at avoiding overburdening, if you're good at service delivery, if you're good at evolutionary change, Kanban's not going to be that helpful. But if you're not good at those things, Kanban will help you a lot, but it isn't going to work if your leader is a revolutionary who's in a hurry and wants grand gestures and wants to be seen as the hero.
Perfect. Again, another related question is, do you see a place where design thinking can complement a revolutionary approach?
That sounds like a very specific technical question, and I'd want clarification on what we mean by design thinking. In general, my belief is that nobody is smart enough. And if design thinking involves one person being the grand designer, the smartest guy in the room, I think that's inherently fragile. If, on the other hand, design thinking perhaps involves a greater number of people and is a little more collaborative, maybe it's less fragile. but if it's still defining some target process, some target implementation, then that collective group of people who collaborated on it, they still think they're smarter. They think they're smarter than the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, I really don't believe in that anymore, that nobody is smart enough even collectively. What you need is a capability to adapt.
Okay, perfect. Let's get to a couple of sort of practical questions and related to things that are coming up in the market or industry today. One is at a high level, how does Kanban fit with case management?
So case management is what in relation to the legal profession?
I'm not sure. Perhaps the questioner can clarify that, but I would think that case management could relate to the legal side, or could also perhaps be on the standard help desk ticketing system type of application as well.
So it strikes me that in that case, a case essentially represents some piece of business, some customer request, some deliverable. And from our perspective, it's just a work item type. And individual cases are work items, the tickets on the board. And you use the static method to understand the challenges there and design the board. And
there is a
in that sense, our standard method is, it wouldn't affect, Kanban wouldn't be different. And I'm sure that it would help if you're suffering from the basic problems of overburdening or unreliable, unpredictable, unsatisfactory customer service and delivery.
Does the acronym CMMN, does it make sense? I am not familiar with it. That's what Eves, the call, is asking. That's the relation to case management or reference to case management.
I'm not familiar with it. I'm sorry.
No worries. The question which I think has been discussed in the Kanban community as well is the recent endorsement of, I don't know that to call it endorsement, but the adoption of Kanban by the Scrum.org guys. Any comment on that? Do you endorse it?
Yeah, so we have official guidance for that inside our own business network, which is that we're quite happy with Scrum.org. First of all, it's very validating. They clearly feel that Scrum needs Kanban in order to be better and more effective. And they also feel that they need a Kanban product in their portfolio in order for their business to be successful. So that says a lot about that we're doing the right thing. It also gives a very large number of Scrum adopters permission to use Kanban in a world where one of the leaders of the Scrum community had spent a good number of years saying the opposite. So they now have permission, and meanwhile the class they offer, the professional Scrum Master with Kanban or PSK, is a maturity level 1 team level class. So what they're doing is they're helping us. They're introducing an audience that generally we don't have access to. They're introducing them to Kanban. They're getting them started at a low maturity level implementation, which is probably appropriate at that point. And it doesn't actually compete head-on with any of our product offerings, any of our training classes. And the Kanban maturity model illustrates it very clearly. So we can help you go further with Kanban. So we're very positive on it. We think it's very validating. We think that the Scrum.org is creating a market that actually helps us. And we've actually encouraged accredited Kanban trainers, some of whom were already Scrum.org trainers, We've encouraged them to be offering the professional Scrum with Kanban class as well as our own Lean Kanban University classes. And we've encouraged a number of other LKU trainers to become Scrum.org trainers so that they can attract this audience from these overburdened organizations, low maturity organizations who are looking to Kanban to help relieve their overburdening, and perhaps they look to take Kanban further. So I think it's a hugely positive step, and that Scrum.org are helping us grow the global adoption of Kanban, so it's incredibly positive.
Perfect. And I think we see exactly the same trend, not in terms of any sort of official reference to Scrum.org, but I think the number of our users signing up who are existing Scrum users and are looking to combine whatever they do with Kanban practices, both to improve their delivery capability, but also to just become more agile. I think that's an sort of endorsement of what you just said, David. So absolutely makes sense. So great. So I think this is, we are at the top of the hour. So I think we are at the bottom of the hour. So we will stop here. There are a few more questions that we will probably take up individually with people who have asked them. They are a little too specific to their context. So let's put a stop here. David, thank you so much for a excellent recap of how to and when to implement Kanban. I am sure that people who are on the webinar today would have learned a lot, and basically just helped sort of reiterate their own learnings and thought processes around how to implement Kanban or how to work on Kanban. So thanks a lot for that. Thank you to the entire audience for being here today. If you have any questions, follow up, you can get in touch with us, and I'm going to just go ahead and share our screen here so that you can see the contact information for both David as well as for Digitace of Kanban. And of course, we will share the recording of the webinar and the slides after this the webinar is done with all of you. So hopefully, we hear from you and can get to connect with you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.